Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Again, this is Bob Syverson with Confiz. Would like to welcome everybody. It looks like there's a great crowd out there to our web event with our panelists today on tax automation in D365 and how that can be a competitive advantage for a multi-location retail. Today, we want to cover several different items. One is technology trends in the retail industry, where Pete, our retail guru, will be walking us through that. And then the evolving tax regulations, which Mike will be walking us through. And again, our tax expert, he'll be also walking us through how that can affect multiple location retailers. And then Shahid, our implementation specialist, will be walking us through how the Vertex tax solution can be worked together with Dynamics 365 to address these. And then, at the end, why retailers are choosing Vertex to increase efficiency going down the road. I want to do a quick introduction of our panelists today. I'm Bob Syverson. I've been in the Dynamics industry for about 30 years in multiple industries, including retail. And I am the business director for Confiz, and we'll be introducing the companies here in a minute. But I'd like Pete to introduce himself as the guru of all retail consulting.
Thanks a lot, Bob. My name is Pete Allende. I'm the director of retail consulting at Vertex. So my team is responsible for implementations and integrations of our retail tax solutions for point of sale, for e-commerce, and basically anything retail related.
Thanks, Pete. And my name is Mike Bernard. I'm the VP of Tax Content, the Chief Tax Officer at Vertex. I've been here now about 4 years. Prior to coming to Vertex, I was actually a Vertex customer for about 15 years. I was the General Manager and U.S. Tax Counsel at Microsoft for almost 28 years and essentially ran the North American operations of the tax department there, all phases from income to property to IT to transaction taxes. I came to Vertex, as I said, about 4 years ago to actually work with the next generation of leaders out there that actually are looking to enhance their business applications around transaction taxes. So it's great to be with you here today.
Thanks, Mike. My name is Mohammad Shahid Yaqub. I'm the Senior Director, Professional Services with the Confiz. I'm with the Dynamics, with Microsoft Dynamics products since I'm doing this for the last 15 plus years now. And, we are implementing all these different Dynamics products like F&O and GP. I used to do Business Central as well. And we implement all these solutions, sales tax solutions as part of the implementation of these projects.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to introduce a little bit about Confiz, the company that Shahid and I work for. We are a global Dynamics implementer as well as a Microsoft reseller. We have about 500 total Microsoft consultants. About 170 of those are Dynamics specific. We have over about 240 customers, and many of those are in the Fortune 1000 area in retail, CPG, manufacturing. We facilitate full IT modernization across the Microsoft stack, including cloud, Power Platform, Dynamics, Bespoke. We also have some of our own retail IP around with Shopper Value and C Analytics, which we'd be happy to talk to you about in the future as well. We are a past Partner of the Year winner, as well as we are a current Gold Partner. Pete, you want to introduce a little bit about Vertex? Pete, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'll start over again. Maintaining tax compliance in many scenarios can be time and resource intensive, and Vertex, as a tax automation solution provider, enables a perfect combination of tax accuracy and integrations. So we pride ourselves in delivering unrivaled tax content that's going to ensure accuracy via pre-built integrations, such as with Dynamics. This will allow you to streamline tax compliance and gives you the opportunity to focus key resources from non-revenue generating activities, such as maintaining all of that tax rule and rate content, and better utilize them in time working on strategic growth initiatives. So on the tax accuracy front, Vertex provides reliable and comprehensive sales and tax rules and rates. So this is the content, right? The amount of research to support the nearly 11,000 US jurisdictions, as well as jurisdictions worldwide. And we have 200 tax researchers working full-time to ensure that our content is up to date. And Vertex has immense industry-specific content for things, areas like manufacturing, professional services, and of course, retail, which we'll get into. Our solutions also provide a rate lookup utility that allows you to quickly query for the rate and rule database for quick lookups. Now, moving on to the integration front, pre-built supported integrations for ERP, procurement, billing, e-commerce, et cetera, that you're currently using today. And the focus there being on pre-built, meaning they're battle tested, and supported, meaning that they are maintained and updated. We offer several deployment options, anything from public cloud to private cloud to on-premise deployments. And all of this gives you the reliability and performance that you can build your business and the ability to scale as your business grows. And I'll just keep the floor, Bob, to get into retail trends. So let's start off today by, before we talk about integrations and things, what's happening in the retail world. So first and foremost, we all know that COVID changed many customer behaviors and demands. Some of those changes were temporary reactions to the pandemic and new ways of shopping, and other changes became more permanent or even became a precursor to similar future changes. So 2020 showed more of a need to have reaction, due to health and safety concerns. Some places mandated, limiting in-person shopping and those types of things. And then some of those changes evolved to a matter of convenience and even a differentiator for some retailers. We still see curbside pickup spots at Target, and we still see contactless checkout at the grocery store. So some of those things are here to stay. I can start my customer journey with a retailer on my phone or on my computer, and then I end up at the store picking it up, picking my purchase up, or vice versa. I start at the store and have my purchase shipped to me via a distribution center. Or it could be something as me merely looking on a retailer's website to see the inventory of a specific product at the stores located near me. So the point is that the lines between these channels are blurring, and customers are so used to seamlessly traversing across your channels that the term omni-channel selling might soon be outdated or obsolete. It's just going to be considered selling. It's just kind of the nature of the business. And then another existing trend that the pandemic magnified or accelerated is that as soon as you think you've got all the channels covered, a new one pops up, right? So think of mobile commerce or marketplaces. These have existed for a while now, but we're starting to see we have seen an increased focus on these channels, and not just by smaller independent sellers, but by big box retailers and e-tailers as well. Some new trends that we're kind of keeping an eye on, those food delivery services that bring your fast food to your door, they might be expanding to such things as pet food and office supplies, and not just food, right? So that's a trend we're starting to see. The Internet of Things, buying milk from your smart refrigerator. Who would have thought of that? Who would have thought that 10 years ago? Other platforms and channels, social media, in-game purchases. All these new channels are pushing retailers' capabilities to the limits of scalability and flexibility. And retailers have to be nimble enough to sell wherever and however the customer wants. And then continuing on with more trends, I'd mentioned earlier that there are 11,000 US jurisdictions, right? 11,000. And that number is increasing. We saw more and more jurisdictions imposing a sales tax as a response to revenue shortfalls from COVID. So in 2020 alone, we saw 69 new taxing cities, 177 new taxing districts. So these areas are realizing that maybe they need to start imposing a sales tax or some sort of fee or something to boost revenue. Mergers and acquisitions also seems to be happening at an increasing rate. And subsequently, that expands a retailer's geographic footprint. Now they're having to register in more places that they weren't used to. And that, coupled with the Wayfair legislation a few years back, which Mike will describe later in this presentation, retailers are challenged to manage taxability across an increasing number of jurisdictions, whether it be states or at the city level or the local district level. Also, in an attempt to create a more unique customer experience, we've also seen a trend towards this idea of bundling, which means you're grouping either products and services or separate products together and selling that as a single line item. It could be something like a basket of wine, cheese, and crackers, or it's a bundling of goods and services like an appliance with installation. Some of these retailers also bundle goods with a related experience like a trip. So think of maybe you buy golf clothes, golf equipment, and bundled with a golf trip, or camping gear with a camping excursion, or we've seen some of these performance car manufacturers bundle a day at a driving school, for example. Retailers are trying to build this whole experience or lifestyle around their product and that complements their brands, which poses obvious tax complexity, right? Those items in that bundle are going to have different taxability. And finally, going back to the omni-channel trend from the last slide, retailers are integrating basically everything to everything, right? E-commerce is talking to point of sale and vice versa. Point of sale, traditionally not integrated to order management, is now integrated to the OMS. Mobile apps, they have to be able to communicate to a store's inventory to facilitate things like curbside pickup. So to the retail world at large, COVID accelerated the move from physical shopping to digital by anywhere between 5, 15, 20 years, depending on what study you read. But from a retailer's perspective, what COVID did was effectively magnify the silos that exist between its channels, right? Brick and mortar operated over here, e-commerce operated over there. They had separate business processes, they had separate systems, separate data. So it's not so much the shift to digital per se, although that was a challenge in itself to a lot of retailers, but it's this cross-channel experience expected by the customer that posed the biggest challenge. Curbside pickup, along with traditional BOPUS and Boris, these hybrid cross-channel experiences really forced retailers to rethink how they manage multiple channels. And Bob, I'll turn it back to you.
So at this point, we're going to turn this over to Mike to walk us through how these tax rules have changed the market and how they apply to multi-channel retailers as well.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Thanks, Pete. So what you have in front of you is this is kind of the agenda that I'm going to speak today about. Obviously, Pete informed you about the business decisions and things that are going on around the business. But there's kind of like also this within the tax departments, there's a lot of activity that they've tried to kind of integrate a lot of systems, clean things up, make sure the data is clean, and also to properly file tax returns. And one of the things I'll say about transaction taxes is that the one thing that it really does, it impacts the customer and the business almost more so than the income tax. And the reason it does is because every time you sell something, you actually have to produce a proper invoice, and that invoice feeds the order to cash cycle. So if you think about that invoice, it not only has to have the proper name, the delivery place, the SKUs, but it has to have the proper tax, whether it's taxable or exempt, and the right amount. So that's what we kind of think about, is that it directly impacts it. So from a great ERP system, billing system, to a really good application to where you can store all that information and then produce it on it, that's really kind of the value chain that all of these products kind of bring. And so the thing that I want to say here is the future state of transaction taxes is actually looks very bright. And so that's why the investments are being made there. It's one of the reasons I came over to Vertex, is because if you look at, say, the last, say, 60 years or so, there's been several economic downturns, all the way from the Depression in the 80-82 range to the housing crisis in 07-09 to the pandemic. But there's one thing that's kind of been really true about this, is that transaction taxes are actually more resilient than, say, the income tax and property taxes. They seem to go down. Transaction taxes seem to go down faster, but they pop back a lot better. And so there are several reasons why states are actually starting to move more towards a transaction-based system rather than income tax. And so I've got a number of these things listed here. Obviously, in the first one, there's a monthly remittance as it relates to transaction taxes. In the second, we actually see that it's easier to audit. There's less, the income tax is full of a lot of preferences and a lot of technical analysis that you don't really have to have as much so in the transaction tax space. So it's so actually governments like it a lot better. And then thirdly, their transaction taxes, you can raise rates a lot faster without a whole lot of debate around who it really affects, because it does affect people, but generally raising the rate is it's simpler than trying to argue around, say, an income tax. It also, you can expand the base, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And then lastly, one thing I do want to point out where we've worked with a lot of our customers on is, as it relates to the Wayfair decision, we'll talk about that here on the next slide, but as it relates to Wayfair, Wayfair applies not only to states, but also applies to countries. So we have a lot of US-based companies who have no connection, no physical presence, say in Australia, New Zealand, or Germany, or other places. And if you cross over those economic threshold amounts, you actually should be collecting and remitting VAT. And so we've talked to a lot of customers about that as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so when we talk about economic nexus rules, what are we really talking about? Nexus means a connection. So there's a connection between one item and another item. So for example, if you are located in California, you're a California resident, all of your work is in California, you don't really travel anywhere, but you may do some meetings over the internet. California is the only one who has the right to tax you, okay? So as it relates to transaction taxes, there are these nexus standards. Prior to 2018, with the Wayfair decision, you had to actually have a physical presence in a state before a retailer was actually required to collect or remit sales tax. So you actually had to have an employee, a sales office, a distribution center, a warehouse, something like that, a store that was actually physically there. Then what happened in 2018, Wayfair comes along and says, the state of South Dakota says, hey, look, there's all this activity out there, and there's a bunch of these sellers who have no physical presence in our state, and yet they're selling to a lot of our residents here to the detriment of the local retailers who have to collect and remit, but they don't have to collect and remit. So as you see as the 1 to the 4th bullet down, eventually the Supreme Court made this determination, this factual determination, that there's no difference between a brick and mortar store and a digital store. And so once they made that decision, then what they said is that the requirement to actually collect and remit sales tax by a remote seller from another state into South Dakota, they actually had to start collecting and remitting. Okay, so now you still have the physical presence test, and now you have a new test called the economic nexus rules. So let's go to the next slide, and let's talk a little bit about what those rules are. Okay, so as we relate to this, if you kind of look at the second bullet there, the states are free to set their own dollar threshold amounts and their own transaction amounts per calendar year as to who actually has to file, collect, or remit in a particular state. There's no federal law that says to do that. That's prohibited by the 10th Amendment. So what happens here is you have South Dakota who might have a dollar threshold of say $100,000. California might have 500,000. States like North Carolina will have something around say the 250 or 300 range per year. And then there's also this transaction test that a lot of these states actually put into play when around Wayfair around 2018. So 100 or 200 transactions. So it's kind of an either or test. And what you've seen kind of in the third bullet is that states now know that once they've kind of worked their way through who really needs to remit and file, is they've gone more to a dollar threshold amount, because that actually seems to be a better indication of where the activity is rather than in the transaction space. Okay, so you can have a whole bunch of small amounts being sold, but then but they really don't rise to kind of a material amount. Okay, and one of the things that that we've done is that retailers have to pay attention as to when you actually meet those standards. So normally, I'm going to give you a very simple example. Let's say you're selling into South Dakota this year. You sell for 2022, you don't meet the $100,000 test, and you don't meet the, let's say there's no transaction test there. You don't have to then collect or remit for 2023. until you meet the economic nexus standards, you don't have to, assuming you have no physical presence test, you don't have to start collecting or remitting. Well, let's say during 2022, you meet the dollar threshold, you sell, say, $250,000. And for the next year, for 2024, you would have to, or sorry, 2023, you'd have to continue to collect or remit as long as you meet those standards, okay? So we had a lot, and the reason you have to really pay attention to this is because you don't want to issue an improper invoice. And so the measurement period, which is only 12 months or a year, you have to really pay attention to those things. All right, next slide, please. How to withdraw. So what we're talking about here is, in the previous slide, we talked about when you have to get into collecting or remitting. This is when you have to get out of collecting or remitting. Again, you don't want to disadvantage or take sales tax from customers who actually you shouldn't be applying to them if you don't meet the economic nexus thresholds. So what we're saying here is if you drop, let's say, going back to my previous example of meeting the standards in 2022, then having to collect or remit in 2023. And let's say in 2023, you're collecting or remitting, you're going along. And then at the end of the year, you see you fell under the standards, again, the economic standards. Then what you would have a right to do is you'd have a right to withdraw and not collect in 2024. So this is something that you have to kind of keep track of. And so then normally we've had a lot of customers who've had to withdraw. The way you do that is the last bullet point. Normally you write the Department of Revenue, they have a form on there, or you write the Secretary of State, and then you formally withdraw. But again, you have to pay attention to these things, again, if you don't have any physical presence in any of these states. So watch out for that. Next slide. Okay, so the first 3 bullet points or so, I'm going to talk about digital taxes. And what I'm really talking about here is sales and use tax on digital products. Okay, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about where we see sales and use tax expanding. So the first couple of bullets, as you see, video streaming and audio streaming is normally subject to sales tax, where at the point of where the subscriber is, or where their billing address is. And so as it relates to that, most states see that they see no difference between streaming something and if you went out and you purchased a CD or you rented something. And so there's a lot of activity obviously that's going on as it relates to streaming. So sales and use tax is appropriate. In the second bullet, much like if you would go to, say, a local ball game, if you went to a hockey game or a baseball game or a football game, there's normally an amusements tax that most cities actually apply to that. So if you're streaming things that cities or locals consider entertainment, not only will there be a sales tax on top of that, but there'll also be an amusement tax of, say, 5% on top of it. So those are some of the taxes that we see popping up that we're actually covering in our products. And then I talked already about the billing thing, about where it's located. So your billing address may be, say, in California, but you may be enjoying your video or your audio or whatever you're doing, say, where you're on vacation in Texas or Florida or Minnesota, wherever you're at. Normally the sales tax that applies is where the billing address is. So it's the same rules that apply for your cell phone. So obviously a lot of you use your cell phone in different states as to where your billing address. So the actual location of where it gets taxed is actually your billing address. And then lastly, on the last three bullet points I want to make here is taxes are expanding to professional services and some personal services. So outside of the US, most services are taxed, but inside the US, there's only about 7 or 8 states that actually tax services. So one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, that governments like about the transaction tax or sales tax is they can expand the base. So one of the things you're going to see in the future is you're going to see professional services such as IT, accounting, law, those types, not healthcare, but those types of professional services, which will probably become subject to sales tax. And then some personal services, which states consider more discretionary. So things like cleaning or something like that is where you're going to start to not childcare, but certain personal services that you're going to continue to see expanded upon. And then crypto, which has received a lot of attention in the news media lately. Since there's so much activity around it, states are now starting to not only take it as a form of payment, but they're also going to look in probably putting a sales tax on top in terms of crypto trades. So we'll see how that's going to work out. And then lastly, if you look at the first 4 items there, which seem to have a fairly inelastic demand for, those taxes will continue to increase on those items. Environmental fees is rapidly expanding, states where you wouldn't have expected, where, I mean, I think the common thing that all of us know is that there's tire fees, there's packaging fees, but I think you're going to see more and more with environmental fees tacked on to certain goods and services. Next slide. And then lastly, I just want to wrap up with some audit enforcement things. As you can see from the bullet points there, audits by state and locals are back to pre-pandemic rules. That should make sense. They were paused for a while. Auditors generally focus on exempt sales. So they're not, if you're on the sales side, they're not really interested so much if you collect the sales tax on it, it's on the things that were exempt. And so we know what the exempt sales are. We have an application that actually deals with that, which documents that, and you have to have documentation. So if you are selling things to, say, school districts or American Indian tribes or any kind of 401k entity, you have to have that documented as to why you didn't collect sales tax on it. And then lastly, some of you are buying a lot of things, purchases, you put them out into your system. You can purchase most anything without paying sales tax on it, but when you eventually put it into use, you have to pay the use tax on it. So that's also an area where auditors look frequently. And then the third bullet point is you really have to have you have to have an audit ready return, which audit ready is all the information is stored digitally. You can hand the file to the auditor, and that it has all the information there that you need to actually produce and hopefully have a good audit result. And then I think with that, I think given the time issues, I think we'll pause there then. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Mhm.
And then before I jump over to Shahid, if anybody has any questions, please post them in the Q&A section and we'll come back, address those towards the end of the session. So Shahid, you want to walk us through the integration considerations?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike, Pete, and Bob. Okay, so you heard Mike and Pete that what are the latest trend for retail, retailers, that how the retail industry is evolving and what challenges and what the considerations we have to keep in mind from the tax rules and policies by by region, by country, and all these other requirements. So if you are implementing F&O, or you are already a F&O Dynamics 365 F&O customer retailer, where you have a omni-channel configurations, then lots of questions comes into your mind, and that before we implement the sales tax requirements based on the region or the country you are operating in. So I put some on this slide. These are some important questions we discuss in every project when we go and start thinking about that, how the sales tax is going to be configured in Dynamics 365 F&O or commerce. So the first one, which is important one, is that the way that how you're going to configure or your customers and vendors so that you can calculate your tax properly. So the most important part is that you have to think about that how you're applying your tax to the customer vendors. Either you are applying your taxes based on the customer or billing addresses, or you are applying the taxes based on their destination where you are shipping the products. So keeping that in mind, the most important part into consideration is that your addresses, the customer or vendor addresses needs to be properly configured to apply the proper taxes based on jurisdiction. On top of it, it's very important that your term of deliveries are properly configured so that when you do your sales or purchase transactions, system understands that needs to know that which address system should consider to apply the tax for. So when you configure all these different tax rules and taxes by jurisdiction or taxes by provinces or other based on the region where you're operating. It's quite complex configurations out of the box if you're using F&O feature text module. But if you're using a Vertex, it's very simpler than, because Vertex is having all the logic or all the rules and policies already built in their text engine. So that on the configuration side for customers and vendors, it's just you need to know that where to put your customer, the sales tax groups, whether you are applying by customer or vendors or their addresses, billing address, or you can say the delivery addresses. So this is one important thing we consider, which we need to consider. The second thing is that how you set up your item sales tax. Usually it's simple, easy. What we usually do is that we create a global or default sales tax group where we put all the sales tax codes in it, and system applies a tax based on the combination of the customer, vendor, and the items in your sales or purchase transactions. But if you are a vendor or a customer, or you are a customer or a retailer who are having some products which are having some tax exemptions in some regions or in some provinces or in some countries, then you have to think about that, how you can create your tax groups for items and how you can associate those tax groups with your products. But again, if you're using Vertex, Vertex is managing everything in their tax engine. So now your sales tax configuration for items become very easy, and you just need a one group which communicates with the Vertex web service to identify that the product is either taxable or non-taxable. The third thing, which is very important to understand, that if you have a global presence and you have multiple legal entities, and every legal entity or every country have their own tax rules and policies, then configuring all these different legal entities based on their rules is a little bit difficult, and it takes quite of effort to maintain it. But if you're using Vertex, Vertex have the very you can easily go and configure your legal entity specific configurations in their portal, and you can associate your configurations with your legal entities to apply the proper taxes as required. The next one is that how you can move from your destination-based tax setups in F&O to Vertex. So if you are already using F&O, you probably know that there's a functionality in retail module where you can configure your retail destination-based tax setup, where you can define how you apply your taxes. Either you're applying your taxes based on city, county, and country, or if you are, for example, you are in North America and you're having operations in Canada, so the taxes are based on the province and the country only. But if you know that setting up all these different configurations is quite time consuming and takes a lot of effort. So the Vertex is handling everything for you. You don't need to do all these configurations anymore in Dynamics F&O. You just have to enable the Vertex service, and then Vertex will take care of every proper taxation configurations. There is another challenge we usually see, not to every retailer, but if you are using F&O and you're allowing your customers, especially the customers who are placing their orders through e-commerce portals, that they can put their one-time addresses for their deliveries. Then the challenge comes is that the address configuration needs to be correct, so that when the address flows to the sales transactions, system is capable of doing calculating the sales tax properly. What I have seen in my projects is that this is the area where there are sometimes what happens that the customer doesn't enter the address properly, And when it comes to when the sales order comes to the Dynamics F&O, the system is not able to calculate the tax because the address is not correct. But if you're using Vertex, they have a very good feature, where the system, where Vertex sees that there's something is missing in the address. For example, you're missing a postal code or a zip code, or the city is not wrong, or the combination of your zip code and the city is not correct. The Vertex identifies this type of errors and prompt you with the proper addresses that or proper setup of the address that which you can correct on the sales transaction, so the system can calculate the tax properly. And the last thing is that another challenge I have seen in my projects is that when the customer returning their products and you are trying to put some charges on the return orders, there's a challenges that a system doesn't calculate tax properly on the charges you add on the return orders. But if you are using the Vertex, these challenges you can easily take care of these type of issues, and because Vertex is capable of identifying that what type of charges you're adding and what tax setups should be applied to calculate the proper tax on these charges. So these are some considerations I would recommend we usually see and we should consider when we deciding that whether we need to apply or use the out-of-the-box tax sales tax configurations, or we should be using the Vertex. Over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Shad. So now we'd like to turn it back over to Pete to walk through some customer success story items for us. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Bob. So in our work with all of our customers who are retailers of every size and shape, some of the common challenges include, first and foremost, just the sheer complexity of today's tax environment. Being able to handle the increasing number and very specific nature of sales tax aspects, like sales tax holidays, or you have back to school, you have storm preparedness. There's also an increasing number of environmental fees, a lot of different taxes in the food and beverage space. Just staying on top of all of this is daunting enough without all the other disruptors like the pandemic, like mergers and acquisitions, new channels, different customer demands. So that's probably first and foremost the biggest pain point, and why you would want to implement something like Vertex in the first place. Another one is product range, and more specifically, the product range changing very dynamically, selling new types of products. So if you remember back in 2020, when every retailer started selling masks, right? Are they taxable? Are they not taxable? Now we have things like supply chain issues. And like we discussed earlier, this idea of bundling. There's new types of products always coming out, new types of products that retailers are trying to expand their brand. That always poses some challenges. System uptime, right? When is peak anymore, right? It used to be you just had to be prepared for Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and very specific times of the year where your particular brand has high demand. Now peak times are more dynamic than ever, right? Holiday shopping season starts earlier and earlier. The merchandise returns season is extended later and later. So there really is no specific peak anymore. So you just have to be up all the time. We talked about increased use of delivery services, and I touched upon that a little earlier. So, Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, Instacart, those services are going to evolve to more than just food and expand into things like I mentioned, pet supplies and office supplies and that sort of thing. But another aspect to this whole delivery service concept is that, in a sense, and from a tax perspective, really, they are marketplaces in themselves. They're like an Amazon and Etsy and eBay, et cetera. So because customers aren't transacting directly with the restaurant or the grocery store, right? The customers are transacting with these services. So how do you handle things like marketplace facilitator laws, right? How do you handle meals taxes where the restaurant location is not where the transaction is finalized? Those pose some questions from a tax perspective and also from a technology perspective. And moving on to how Vertex can help, how we can tame those complexities. We offer a single consistent tax solution across all of your channels. So all of those omni-channel challenges we've been talking about, How do you provide a consistent tax calculation from brick and mortar store to e-commerce to mobile commerce to marketplace? And this not only means the calculation at the point of sale or at the order creation phase, but also a single solution for reporting and tax filing across all your channels. So if all the data is in the same place, again, breaking those silo walls down, you have a holistic view of all of your transactions across all of your channels. All right. We have content that supports sales tax holidays and those environmental fees that I mentioned. Our team of researchers ensures that our content is always up to date with the latest jurisdictions, with the latest environmental fees, and everything that's changing so quickly nowadays. We can also supplement your organization through managed service offerings, such as monthly filing or importing all of your customer exemption certificates. We offer different options and really flexible options to how you want to deploy your solution, whether it's on-premise or hosted. Should the tax calculation engine be central in a data center, or should it be installed locally in each store location? All of this is allowing your organization to scale and grow and tackle new channels, sell new products, comply in new jurisdictions. So what does all of that mean? I'd mentioned that COVID magnified the silos that exist between the channels, but just as every challenge is an opportunity, it also allows retailers to reimagine how all of those systems and business processes should work together, right? What integrations are needed to support new ways of meeting the customers, where and how they want to be met. Retailers need to be agile enough to be sufficiently reactive to disruptors like COVID, but also be proactive to be ready and even anticipate what the next big thing will be, right? What's that disruptor going to be? How am I going to pivot and be nimble enough to adjust? And Bob, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Pete. That was great. We do have a couple of questions from our audience. So is Vertex being used for just calculation and recording of tax, or Vertex has its own sales tax settlement process at month end? Who wants to handle it?
I can answer that, Bob. So we do provide sort of multiple prong approach to the solution, right? So we do offer the calculation, and that is all the content. So at the point of sale on your website, we can provide that calculation capabilities to be able to provide the customer with the price, right, with including tax. We also have reporting and compliance capabilities where we can take all of those transactions and store them in a reporting solution that allows you to see not only the line item level, but even more granular than that, the tax collected per jurisdiction per line item. So this $10 line item, X amount goes to the state of California, Y amount goes to the city of San Francisco, et cetera. So you're seeing that at the most granular level. And then beyond just the reporting, which is really analysis and audit defense, we do provide solutions for the actual filing, right? So we provide software and or services so that you can file with those jurisdictions every month.
Thank you. And then we have one more question, another question. Do you think these changes are permanent, or do you foresee things going back to the way things were?
Yeah, I could take that, and Mike, feel free to chime in. I mentioned some of the things were what we thought were going to be temporary, like curbside pickup. While it existed before the pandemic, you're starting to see a really organized effort by retailers. If you drive into a Target parking lot, you see these dedicated spaces, and they seem to be more and more every time I go there, of these sort of drive-through, very convenient. You text or call a number, and they bring your order out to you. I think those things are going to stay for some time. I mean, people have kind of. It was a matter of health and safety, but now it's like convenience. I don't even have to get out of my car. So I think those types of things, and maybe even permutations of that idea, are going to stick around. Right? I think those the blending of the channels, ordering online, picking up in store, and again different hybrid versions of that are going to be here to stay.
And that gets back to the whole concept of the new normal. So
right. I think now it's not so new anymore. It's just normal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So another question is, what are the most successful pivots that you've seen retailers take in response to the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think marketplaces was a huge pivot, right? Especially, well, maybe not especially, but obviously for the smaller retailers who maybe did not have an online presence. When they had to shut their stores down during the beginning of the pandemic, they turned to Etsy, Amazon, and those types of marketplaces to sell and reach a wider, a broader audience, right? A broader customer base. And those worked. And we're starting to see, well, we have started to see even big box retailers have an Amazon store or have an eBay store. So they're able to provide this new kind of shopping mall, if you will, right? This one-stop shop where I can buy a variety of different things from different sellers all in one transaction. So I think that was a significant pivot. Yeah, I think that's probably what comes top of mind for me.
Another question is, do we see some of these things turning into changes in legislation, or are they just going to be kind of stuff that's floating out there?
Yeah, I think, Bob, there is, as I mentioned in some of my comments, the states are looking really to tax activity and get away from, say, income taxes. Now, that evolution is probably going to take another 4 to 5 years. It won't happen on the federal level, but the states really are looking to tax activity. So that's why that was one of the reasons I came to Vertex, was because I thought that trend would continue. What we see is that all of this activity around the pandemic kind of accelerated that. And there's so much data to show that if states just kind of move towards that, towards taxing services, taxing professional services and personal services, and then raising rates. And then the other thing is there's just more and more jurisdictions who are strapped for cash that continue to add on. So you'll see water districts, police districts, school districts. And so traditionally where you saw, say just 10 years ago, you might only have 3 different taxes, sales tax components to a sales tax. Now you're seeing like 5. So I think it's just going to get more granular, and that trend's just going to continue. There's no doubt.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So one last question and we'll wrap it up. In contrast to the best practices, are there things that retailers should not do in response to new ways of meeting the customer demand?
Yeah, I would say if you can't successfully manage a channel, then just don't do it. You know, we've seen sort of the horror stories of retailers who tried to implement curbside pickup and it just didn't work. And what you're doing is now you're alienating a customer, right? You know, that the whole idea of first impression is most important. And if they can't complete a curbside pickup, or they walk into your store and they try to order something to be shipped to their house and they don't get it, right? Or it comes really late, or it's the wrong item. You know, if you can't do it right, then don't do it, right? Just, you know, make sure that you get all your ducks in a row before you really launch something that's customer facing like that.
Thank you. So going forward, we would really like to engage with all of our participants today and provide you with a free consultation on how you can implement Vertex with the D365 going forward. So either reach out to us or we'll be following up with you as well going forward. Any other comments, gentlemen, to the group?
No, I don't. I look forward to
No.
speaking with some of you.
I would just say it's all complex, Bob, but it's all manageable too. So I would say that.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we'll be following up and talking to you as we go forward. Look forward to some more retail-based webinars in the upcoming months. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you. Mm-hmm.